Well, Parker, it's so great to chat with you today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is great.
Absolutely. Well, let's just dive into it. You are from Fight the New Drug. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means for listeners that aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, what a strong name, right? It's kind of like, wait, what does that mean exactly? So, yeah, Fight the New Drug, we're a non religious, non legislative nonprofit that was founded in 2009. And our mission is to allow individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision on the topic of porn or pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts.
Yes. Why was it important to you guys to not have a political or religious affiliation?
Yeah, we just want to be able to provide everyone the opportunity to make an informed decision. And one of the issues right now that we're seeing in society is there's a demonstrable amount of research or a significant amount of research demonstrating the harms of pornography for individuals, the consumer, their relationships, our society as a whole. Even for people who aren't consuming pornography, porn is impacting our society. And so we wanted to be able to educate on that for all people, because regardless of any diversifying factor, porn can and does impact all of us. And that's what we really wanted to be able to do, is to educate everyone, allow everyone the opportunity to at least make an informed decision, because they
Mhm.
have the information demonstrating the impacts porn has on those individuals, those relationships, and our society.
Yes, absolutely. It's a conversation that I have heard amongst political groups and or religious groups. However, it's really interesting to me that people like Andrew Huberman, or I've heard about it on Diary of a CEO, they have been talking a lot about this and the effects on your brain and dopamine. I know that regarding younger people, the Barna Group found 64% ages 13 to 24 actively seek it out weekly. So people, like you said, are talking about this. It's not just something that I hear that you hear in church groups anymore, I should say. And I'm grateful for that because it does have a huge impact. But what are those implications on the brain? I'll allow you to fill listeners in for those that don't really understand.
Yeah, no, great question. And maybe even just a point to clarify is, even for people who have a moral or religious reason for not wanting to consume pornography or thinking that it's harmful, the science and the research only strengthens that perspective. So it can only add to it. And that's what we want to be able to do for everyone, right? Regardless of any of those factors that are different among different individuals. Now, as far as like how porn impacts individuals, we often talk about how most of the research shows that porn impacts us in three ways when it comes to the brain. And that's that porn can be habit forming, it can become an escalating behavior, and it can impact the individual consumer's mental health. So, habit forming, these are the things that we're sometimes hearing on, large podcasts or people on Instagram, right? They're talking about how over time, people that consume pornography can develop a compulsive behavior or even an addiction to pornography. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that everyone who's been exposed to or consumed porn is addicted. That's not true, right? But there's research to show porn addiction is very real. It shares many similarities to an addiction to a substance like, say, nicotine, that makes cigarettes and tobacco products addictive. And aside from all of the research demonstrating that porn can be habit forming, there's also just countless people around the world who recognize that porn's impacting their life, and yet they still can't seem to stop. And I don't think that's something we should ignore either when we're talking about how it can be habit forming, right? We should also acknowledge that there seems to be a lot of people who struggle with it. They can't seem to quit. They think it's impacting their life. And I don't think we should discredit those people either, right? So in addition to the research, we want to include those personal accounts showing that many people feel impacted by this issue.
Absolutely. Would you say that the nonprofit Fight the New Drug, are you guys trying to, I guess, who is your target audience? Is it really anyone and everyone, or are you really trying to hit teenagers and young adults?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely want to educate all people, but especially young people, because many young people today are growing up in an age where they have never even considered that porn might be harmful to them. They were exposed to it at far too young of an age. You mentioned some statistics a minute ago, and parents aren't super comfortable oftentimes having conversations with young people about pornography. And so we have a generation that's been exposed to more porn than ever in the history of the world, that at the same time are being talked to about these issues, as much as we were in the past, which is very little, right? And so, or not at all. And so that's really a huge issue. So yes, we want to educate all people, but we also especially want to be able to reach young people and help them make healthy and informed choices. And we're not trying to shame anyone or make anyone feel bad. We want them to recognize that this can impact them and to make healthier choices. We want to encourage healthier behaviors. We're not trying to make them feel bad or shame them or something like that.
So all that to say, what would you say makes your approach, I guess, different or stand out amongst other people that are talking about this? I mean, you have quite the following.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good question. I was in a meeting recently and someone asked something like that, like what sets Fight the New Drug apart? And it was like, well, kind of, we're the only ones doing this, all right? Like there's pockets of people who like will have an episode or will talk about this in one post, or a group that has a mission that's sometimes connects to pornography and they'll talk about the impacts of porn in that way. But to be solely focused on demonstrating the impacts of porn through science and research, we're a research aggregate. We're not performing research ourselves. We're taking research from major respected institutions that's peer reviewed, and we're trying to make it accessible, tangible, digestible for everyday people. We're kind of the only group we know of that's doing that right now, that's really trying to help people to understand. Of course, there's other groups that focus on issues like domestic violence or sex trafficking that sometimes there's overlap with pornography, but to be focused solely on the pornography, we're kind of in our own little realm over here. So,
yes, I haven't decided yet how to air this episode because I also just yesterday recorded an episode with Kristen
oh
Jensen
yeah,
about her book Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and that is more for little kids, for children. But
great resource though. I'm glad
oh
you
my
had her
God.
on. She's great.
Yes, absolutely. So we talked about that, and I wanted to stay away with some of the questions that I had planned to ask you just because we talked more about sexual predators online. And again, if a child is seeing this, knowing to go talk to an adult immediately and just the awareness here. So I wanted to kind of stick more about the social and psychological impact with you, and again, more the statistics about what this is doing to us, our society, the brain. But I do want to know if you've seen research on people's habits increasing in this area since COVID, because I would assume that people's habits in this way have increased.
Yeah, I remember seeing, some of the major mainstream porn companies, online porn companies, posting about how they're during like the lockdowns and during COVID, especially during the like really the peak of COVID, talking about how much traffic to their website had increased. Absolutely. I mean, they were openly saying that. And that's an issue, right? We talked kind of briefly about how it impacts individuals. We talked about how it can be habit forming, but we also know it's an escalating behavior. So when people consume porn over time, they end up needing more porn more frequently, which these are familiar language for other addictions or habit forming things, right? That they can over time need more of something more frequently, right? We mentioned nicotine. So cigarettes, same thing. Someone tries a cigarette, and for many people, they end up smoking 2 cigarettes, and then at some point a half a pack of cigarettes, and then oftentimes like a pack of cigarettes a day, or in extreme scenarios, 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And that's because the brain becomes desensitized, right? So they need more of that in order to get the same pleasure response in the brain. And the same thing happens with pornography. According to research, we see that people need more porn more frequently, but with porn, it even goes a step further. We find that people end up needing more extreme forms of content. And all of these things lead to it impacting mental health, because we know that young people are being exposed at younger and younger ages. You mentioned how many young people are consuming it, right? Recent research in 2022, you can find these stats on our website. They found that the majority of kids are exposed to porn by the time they're between 11 and 13. So, that's really, really young to have the majority of kids have already been exposed. And then we see that 75% of males and 70% of females have viewed, consumed, or been exposed to pornography between the ages of 14 and 18. So we know they're exposed really young. We know they're consuming it as they get older. And this is impacting, like you said, our relationships, our society as a whole.
So I would say the majority of my audience are parents. Now that I have this rebrand with Clear Intentions from Minimalist Moms, I was hoping to reach more, I guess, singles or young professionals with the title. But all that to say, for the parents listening, how can they, I want to say encourage, but what can they do to help their children in the teenage years? How would you tell parents that they could encourage their teens with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously her resource, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, great for younger audiences. Like we point to her all the time. We're good friends with her. I've seen her at conferences. I've been on her podcast or on her Instagram before. Like she's great. And that resource is wonderful because the earlier we can have these conversations in an age appropriate way, the better. But when we're talking about older kids, really what it comes down to is when we recognize that 75% of parents, so 3 out of 4 parents, according to the BBFC, believe their kids have not seen porn. And when they looked at survey data from just those parents' kids, they found the majority of parents who believe their kids haven't seen porn, their kids have already been exposed to pornography.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem, right? So if 3 out of 4 parents think my kids haven't seen porn, and we look at data just from those parents and find the majority of their kids have already been exposed,
Yeah.
okay, well, wait, where do we go from here? What should I be doing? Because that's not where we want this to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we kind of change this? Well, the first thing we have to recognize is that we need to be willing to have the conversation. A lot of parents, they want resources that are just going to like fix the problem. And we always tell people, there are great things you can and should be doing, right? Filtration, bare minimum, monitoring, even a step better, safe devices, even a step better, right? There's all these things we can be doing to protect our kids from many issues, including pornography. But at the end of the day, none of these are going to solve the problem. What we really need to change our mindset around is how do we have these conversations and what should they look like and how do we do that appropriately at a variety of ages? Because this conversation should evolve just like our kids are aging. We're not going to take away a kid's innocence by talking with them about this at a young age. We can have the conversation be completely appropriate for a young child and then evolve as they become a preteen and a teenager and all those different things. And so it really comes down to the conversation. So we have a great resource for that called the Conversation Blueprint. You can check it out on our website. It's designed specifically with this in mind. We also have a wonderful documentary. These resources are all free because we're a nonprofit. So it's called Brain Heart World. You can go to our website, ftnd.org. And that documentary is appropriate for anyone 11 years and older. It's a great resource for preteens and teens. You can sit down and watch it as a family. You could screen it ahead of time if you want. And it's going to talk about how porn impacts individuals, relationships, and society. And then start that conversation so that it's less awkward. Because if we just have to bring this up out of the blue, parents feel unprepared. And it really comes down to being prepared ahead of time for these conversations, the same way you would for a job interview, right?
I think so often that people, children, teenagers will say, and honestly, even adults, just get stuck in the shame spiral of it all. It's like, I don't want to do this thing that feels compulsive. Oh no, I've done it. I feel guilt, shame, remorse, and yet I can't tell anyone, which is what I need, is the accountability to keep me from doing this. And then I don't have that. And so therefore I do it again. And it's just like, you feel guiltier and guiltier. And like you said, the content may get more just intense, for lack of a better word. But yeah, I just think that as parents, like you said, we are in such denial. I wasn't struggling with this in high school, but there were other things that I was struggling with, alcohol. And my parents, in a certain way, I'm like, did you not know? But maybe they did. Maybe they wanted to believe the best of me. And yet you're right. We should have had different conversations. And I think, not to speak for my parents, but I think they just didn't know how to bridge the gap of communication, especially I think for the older generations. I don't think that they knew how to navigate some of these things. So
no, you're right on track there. And that's the thing is, I often make this, we do live events, and that's another great resource to consider when we're talking about talking to teenagers, is having someone who does this all the time come and speak in their middle school, their junior high, their high school, to a community group, to the parents, do a parent night, something like that in your community, and have someone come do that. Those are a great resource. And one of the things that we talk about in those events with parents, if we're having a parent night specifically, is helping them to understand that if you had been out of work for 6 months, right? Like, hopefully that doesn't happen. And you lost your job, you've been looking for work for 6 months, you haven't paid the mortgage for 2 or 3 months, and you got a job interview for this like dream job. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine what you would be doing to prepare for that job interview? You would be like, okay, here's a binder of everything I've ever done at previous employers. Here's like 3 really credentialed referrals from people who know me. I'm prepared to know everything about the company. I'm prepared to know everything they might ask me about. And I'm prepared to ask them questions about what this job entails, right? You would be like so prepared. But for some reason, when it comes to having conversations with our kids that are crucial on topics like pornography, we're not as prepared as we should be. And so when we talk to the parents about, well, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it's like, well, no offense, but we as parents are creating a good chunk of that awkwardness and uncomfortableness because we're not prepared.
That's a lot of what I talked about with Kristen, is this uncomfortability that we have. And maybe we have baggage in this area in general, but also I found when I was talking to my daughter, who was 8 or 9 when I talked to her about sex, it was purely mechanical. It didn't have those hormones driving her at that time. So For me, it was easier to have these conversations at a younger age. I have yet to have this conversation with her, but I've been spurred on now that I talked to Kristen. But all that to say, yeah, I think that if we are uncomfortable with these things in general, like we have to do some soul searching to say why. We are capable. We are supposed to be leading our children in this area. We're comfortable doing it in every other area. So why is this kind of off limits? Do you have kids
100%.
yet, Parker?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How old are your kiddos?
So I have a almost 4-year-old and then one on the way.
Okay, so not quite necessarily.
Yeah, not teenagers yet,
Yes.
but still,
Yeah.
like even the 4-year-old, going back to Kristen, it's like good pictures, bad pictures, junior. Like I can talk to them that if he is on an iPad for some reason, something inappropriate comes up, he can talk to dad. Or if someone makes him feel uncomfortable, he should talk to me, and that people shouldn't touch him or whatever, right? Like there's appropriate ways to have some of these conversations, even at a really young age. And those conversations can evolve as they get older.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk just a little bit more about the effects of pornography in our society. Things like domestic violence in relationships, human trafficking.
Yeah.
I mean, are you having, when you guys go out to schools or small groups, are you having people share personal testimonies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do a lot of things to capture personal accounts. Sometimes people will share with me one-on-one after a live event, but we also have a podcast. We have true story videos. Our YouTube has around 250,000 subscribers. We'll post true story videos on there of everyone from sex trafficking survivors to people who are sex trafficked in pornography to people who struggle with pornography. And then we have a blog. We have a lot of different ways that we capture true stories. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do is educate people through personal stories as well as the science and the research. But you asked another question kind of about how is this impacting in broader ways? And that conversation goes a lot of different directions. So in addition to the listener right now, right? Like you're a person of value. If you're struggling with pornography, it does impact you individually. A lot of people are like, this isn't a big deal. It doesn't hurt anybody else. Well, you matter, and this does impact you according to research. So we would encourage you to make healthier, more informed choices. But also relationships, our society. And similarly, relationships, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, but kind of on the society side of things, one of the issues with pornography is that recent research shows that between 35% and 88% of popular scenes on mainstream porn sites contain physical violence and aggression. So the most conservative research on this subject shows a little over a third of the videos that the researchers analyzed contain physical violence and aggression. And the most aggressive definition of violence and aggression in another study showed almost 9 out of 10 of the scenes that they looked at contain violence and aggression. Now, what we look at, what we consume, it impacts the way that we think about and treat other people. And that is not the content that we want to be young people's sex education. So when you're talking about a broad base of listeners, right, many of them are parents, and this is great information. I think everybody at some point can agree that at the very least, even if someone is pro pornography, that at least kids shouldn't be being exposed to pornography at some age. But additionally, we hope to educate everyone, even if they're not a parent, about their own porn consumption to help them make healthier decisions.
Just off the top of your head, I'm thinking of a mom and she knows that her son has been partaking and he just refuses to talk to her. Truly, how can she help him?
No, that's a great question, because it is difficult when someone just does not want to have this conversation. So the first thing there is like the sooner we can have this conversation, the better. The sooner we can normalize like difficult topics, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because if the first time we try to talk about this is with a 17-year-old and they don't want anything to do with us, that is really difficult. Like I commend you as a parent. That's a really difficult place to be. So if there's a way to start the conversation sooner with another younger kid, then try that, because that might be helpful when they get older. Now, we can't go back and change the past. So what can we do about the 17-year-old? It really comes down to having healthy expectations, I think, and saying, hey, you know what? Like, we are going to have this conversation. I know that you're not happy about it, and I know it can be uncomfortable, but this is really important for you to understand. And kind of taking them through some of the issues that we want to talk about. Now, we have a great episode of our podcast with Jo Robertson. We also have a blog with her that she wrote herself and posted to our blog. And she's going to kind of talk about what she calls the 5 C's of disclosure and being able to talk with kids about their own pornography habit. We also have the conversation blueprint I mentioned earlier to help you figure out how to have this conversation generally with a teenager or preteen or whatever, when it can be really difficult. Sometimes kids don't want to talk about this. But I think setting the expectation that I know you don't want to do this, we're going to do it anyway, is really important. It's okay to have rules. It's okay to have some boundaries. It's okay to have some expectations for young people. It's okay to make them do things they don't want to do. In fact, I think it can be good for them.
Yes, absolutely. I'm curious, why is this your passion and why are you so passionate about getting this message out to people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's the short version of the story is kind of funny. A long time ago, probably like 10 years ago, back when Facebook was actually still cool, Fight the New Drug had a campaign on social media called Porn Kills Love. And we had some t-shirts, and I saw that and I thought it was really, really cool. And I was like, this is so great, because I knew a lot of people in my life who were struggling with pornography at the time. I was not struggling with pornography at that time, but I knew people who were, and I wanted to be able to help them. And then I heard about an event by Fight the Drug in my community. So I went to a live event. I watched the speaker talk about the issue, talked about how it impacts individuals, relationships, and society. They demonstrated research and kind of created this like excitement around this topic, something that people are normally uncomfortable talking about, and instead helping them to be like, oh my goodness, I'm not powerless to this. Something can be done. And actually, I can change my mind about this if it was someone that didn't agree originally, and that they could become involved. They could help educate other people. And I was like, this is crazy. This is like a topic that's so uncomfortable and taboo. And people are literally like changing their thoughts about it. So I went to that event. Afterward, I wanted to talk with the speaker. I was a little bit naive. I think sometimes naivety is a good thing. In this case, it was. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go chat with him. And didn't realize there was going to be like so many people that wanted to talk with him. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And I had known someone that helped put the event together. So I just started helping them like clean up. I was just being nice and hanging out, whatever. Right. So I'm like rolling up extension cords and stuff. And actually, at the very end, he was walking out the door, the speaker, and he was like, hey, by the way, did you have a question? And I was like, actually, I did. I just didn't want to bug you. I've always wanted to do some public speaking. Do you have any advice for me? And I thought he was going to be like, oh, yeah, like Fight the Drug, we need some speakers. Because that's what I was hoping, right? And he didn't say that. And I was bummed. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, that's great. He kind of gave me like some tips and some things that I could consider doing and what I'm passionate about and whatever. And I was like, okay. And then he was walking out again, and my friend that had helped organize the event was like, oh, by the way, Parker's awesome. And he like stopped and turned around and was like, hey, actually, by the way, like Fight the Drug is looking for a speaker right now. Is that something you'd be open to? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so I sent him an email, and that was actually Clay Olson, who's one of the founders of Fight the New Drug. It happened to be one of the speakers, or the speaker for that particular event. And so then I ended up going through a training process, getting certified to present for Fight the New Drug. I did that for like a year and a half, 2 years, in addition to a full-time job that I had and going to school. I just kind of did that on the side. And then a position opened up a little over 6 years ago in the office that was a full-time position. I applied for that and I got it. And now I kind of oversee our public outreach initiatives. So yeah, it kind of all just snowballed, right? I was an everyday fighter, is what we call them, people who follow along with the movement. They try to get involved. They try to help educate other people. I went to a community event, and then just one thing led to another over time. So
curious, another question that popped into my head. Do you guys receive pushback? Who is pushing back against you? Because I assume that there is someone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not everyone agrees with what we're saying, right?
I'm not sure if you want to answer that, but I do know that like
no.
There's this whole movement that is kind of like express your freedom. This is strong for couples. There is the other side of this. And so
of course, yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to point to the science and to not make it a political or religious issue, like you said. I mean, that's fine if that is one of your strong talking points, but it's like, no, this is more about the mind and how it's affecting these things. So I'll let you answer that first question, though.
No, that's a great question. So, and totally a fair question, because obviously not everyone in society agrees that porn is harmful, or we wouldn't exist. And we respect that. We respect the individual's right to make their own decisions. At the end of the day, if people disagree with us and they think that porn is fine and they want to consume it and they're an adult, then that's fine. Obviously, we want to protect young kids from pornography. We don't think that they should be making that choice to consume that content because they're a minor. But among adults, if they want to consume pornography, okay. But we hope to at least be able to get the information in front of them. We hope that at least they'll have the opportunity to consider that porn might be harmful. Because for many people today, young and old, porn is like flipping on the light switch or putting gasoline in your car. People turn on the lights, they have no idea where electricity is made, how it's made, how it gets to our building or home, how it works, how electricity somehow produces light. That's a weird thing to think about. Or we put gasoline in our car and we don't know how that gasoline got here, or how it was taken out of the earth and processed, or how an internal combustion engine works. And those are just things we don't question. We are just like, this is great. This is so convenient that I have light and that I can have transportation. And for a lot of people, that is their experience with pornography. They're exposed to it at a really young age. No one really talked to them about it. They've never even questioned that it might be harmful, and it makes them feel good. So they don't think about it. But we want to just at least have the opportunity to question that narrative, to say, is this good for you? Or does it make you feel good right now, but has other impacts? Because with relationships, obviously there's a lot of people who are like, oh, porn's great for my relationship. Well, it's like, well, I'm unaware of one single longitudinal study that over time, right, a longitudinal study that demonstrates that porn has positive impacts on relationships. All of the research I'm familiar with demonstrates that over time, porn has a negative impact on relationships. One study that followed couples for 6 years, they found that porn was the second greatest indicator the relationship would suffer over time, that people become less happy in their relationship. I know story after story of people who have been sexually exploited, abused, or sex trafficked within the production of mainstream pornography. A great example of that is Girls Do Porn. This is a popular, well-known mainstream porn company that people applauded and thought was great. Come to find out that for almost a decade, they had been sex trafficking women into pornography. They'd been seeking out women online, telling them that they were going to hire them as fitness models, flying these women to California under the guise of promoting fitness products and fitness equipment, right? Apparel and equipment. So yoga clothing or exercise equipment, totally normal things. Instead, they were picked up at the airport, forced to a location, held there, some of them for days, filmed and raped on camera, and forced to participate in pornography. They were forced to sign contracts. And then everyone that happened to and said, hey, I did not consent to this. I was forced to produce this content. It was edited to look consensual because it only needed to be a few minutes long. Everyone's like, oh, you did this willingly and you just changed your mind after. And now you're trying to play the victim, right? It's like, no, actually, that's not what happened. But it took so many survivors to come forward before anyone believed that they really were sex trafficked. So all of these issues we want people to know about so that they can make an informed decision, because we believe that porn impacts individuals' relationships and society. And at the end of the day, is everyone going to agree with us? No, that was your original question. But we'd like to at least have the opportunity for them to consider that it might be harmful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, and what I was trying to do with Minimalist Moms is simply giving people information. I'm not necessarily suggesting this is how you choose to live your life. I'm saying these ways that I have chosen to live my life are helpful and beneficial, but also you can only lead a horse to water, right? You can't make them
For
drink.
sure. Yeah, totally.
There was one more question I was going to ask you before we wrap up, and that was, my heart goes out to boys. I mean, girls too. I know girls struggle with this, but I have 2 sons. Even on basic billboards, or I'm thinking of when I walked through the mall as a teenager and seeing Victoria's Secret models, it's just like so in your face. And I think it is hard to combat that lust. And then again, it just continues to grow. And especially now where you used to have to seek out the pay-per-view content, or it was only on after a certain time of night, or you'd have to go get your Playboys and they were behind the curtain or the box or whatnot. This is now freely accessible. All you have to do is just click a button that says you're 18 or older. So I think that's
everyone has a device in their pocket that can access it.
Yeah. So the accessibility is, I think, what just devastates me.
Absolutely. Yeah. We talk frequently about how porn is more affordable, accessible, available, and anonymous than ever before. We call that like the 4 A's: accessible, affordable, available, and anonymous than ever before. And we often kind of make a joke that, not that this is always a joking matter, but we try to be as lighthearted as we can when appropriate. We kind of like to joke that if pornography was still simply just printed magazines, I'm not sure that our nonprofit would exist. But because the material has become more violent, extreme, and degrading, and more likely to be habit forming and escalating behavior, and because it impacts relationships in our society, and because people are being trafficked or exploited to produce the content, all of these things together make it problematic, and we want people to be able to make that informed decision.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Parker, was there anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners before we wrap up? You gave us so much to think about. Again, your website is full of resources as well, which I'll be sure to link in the show notes.
Totally, yeah. I'll just really quickly say, for the parents listening at least, one of the best places to go for resources is ftnd.org/parents. It's going to have all the resources I've discussed today and more, as well as outside resources that aren't Fight the Drug resources, but resources that we've vetted and trust. Some of them are affiliate partners, and those resources are great for for other related issues, right? Like safe devices or filtration and monitoring or things like that, or recovery platforms for people who are struggling, because our mission is to educate, but some people need recovery and we can point to resources for that. So that's a great place to go, ftnd.org/parents. And then just live events. We would hope that if you're a parent listening to this, that you would consider having us come to your community and speak to your kid's school or to your group in your community, like whatever it might be, on a college campus in town, whatever it might be. We would love to have the opportunity to do that. So if that's something that you're willing to kind of plan, you can check that out at ftnd.org/live.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to mention it to my husband. He's a high school teacher, so I want to let him know about this nonprofit.
That's great.
Yeah. Last question. Didn't prompt you for this. I ask all of my guests this, and you can apply it to either, again, your purpose and drive behind what you're doing here in this role, or just in general. But I ask my guest, what does it mean to you to live a life with clear intentions?
To live a life with clear intentions. What a great, carefully crafted question. I love that. To live a life with clear intentions. I think it's so easy to just start going through life like it's just zooming past you. Life is just happening to us because so much of our life is the mundane. Dishes do have to be done. We do have to commute places. We do have to grocery shop. We do have to do laundry. We have to clean, like all these things. And we have to work, right? And so suddenly life is just like this. It's just passing over us. And I think to live with clear intentions is to take a step back, take a deep breath, and be like, am I living life or is it living me, right? Am I living life or am I letting it happen? And that's what that comes down to for me. And that goes along great with the message of consider before consuming, right? Am I just consuming this because I always have and it's easier than deciding to stop consuming it and to see if it is impacting my life and if I can tell the difference once I've stopped consuming it? And that's a great thing to apply to our mission, but also just in life generally, like we talked about, right? So
great answer. Well, Parker, thank you so much again for joining me today. I'll be sure to link everything in the show notes for listeners. And I just appreciate, again, you being in this role and trying to get this message out. It's so important. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for helping us do that, Diane. Appreciate it.